I met Lauren in college during junior year. She wasn't just beautiful. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they belonged. She had this laugh that could fill up an entire room, the kind that made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't catch the joke. We started off as friends, but somewhere along the way, it became more. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. After a couple of years of dating, we moved in together. It wasn't perfect. Whoever says living with someone you love is perfect is either lying or has never had to argue about leaving wet towels on the bed. But it was good. We figured things out, split the bills, made weekend plans, and learned each other's quirks. Lauren was the one who double-checked the locks before bed, even though she knew I'd already done it. I was the one who insisted we keep buying the same brand of peanut butter because it's tradition now. We had our routines, our little world. When I proposed last spring, I was so nervous my hands shook when I opened the ring box. She cried, said yes immediately, and hugged me so tightly I thought she'd knock us both over. That moment stuck with me. The way her face lit up, how she couldn't stop smiling afterward. I thought, this is it. She's my forever. A few months ago, Lauren went on a week-long trip with her friends to celebrate one of their birthdays. They rented a beach house out of state, and Lauren couldn't stop talking about it for weeks beforehand. She made packing lists, bought new swimsuits, and even downloaded a playlist called Girls Trip Vibes. I encouraged her to go. She worked long hours at her marketing job and deserved a break. The morning she left, she kissed me on the cheek, tossed her duffel bag into the back of her friend's car, and waved as they drove off. I didn't think much of it. She'd gone on trips before, and we always fell back into sync as soon as she came home. When she got back a week later, though, something was different. Usually, she'd greet me with one of those big hugs where she practically knocks the air out of me, then launch into a full play-by-play of everything they did. This time, she walked in, dropped her bag by the door, and gave me a quick, distracted smile. When I asked how the trip was, she said it was fine, and went straight to the bedroom. I figured she was just tired, but even after she'd rested, the weird vibe didn't go away. That night, we had dinner like we always did after being apart, but she barely touched her plate and kept looking at her phone like she was expecting some urgent message. She didn't offer any stories from the trip, so I asked a few questions to get her talking. She answered them, but her responses were short, almost rehearsed. Yeah, the weather was great. Yeah, we went out to a few bars. It was nice. It didn't feel like Lauren. She'd always been the type to overshare every little detail, from what they ordered for breakfast to how their Uber driver missed a turn. This quiet, distracted version of her was unsettling. I told myself she probably just needed a day or two to settle back in, but deep down, something felt off. Over the next few days, her behavior didn't improve. She was glued to her phone more than usual, always flipping it over when I walked into the room. She wasn't avoiding me exactly, but there was a distance I couldn't explain. It wasn't just physical. It was like she wasn't there with me anymore. We'd talk, and she'd nod and smile at the right moments, but it felt like her mind was somewhere else. I started to notice small things too, like how she'd jump slightly whenever her phone buzzed or how she'd stay up later than usual, texting someone after I went to bed. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. One night after dinner, I asked, "Is everything okay?" She looked up at me, surprised, like she hadn't realized I'd been paying attention. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" she said too quickly. Her voice had that defensive edge to it, the kind that makes you second-guess whether you're imagining things. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "You've just seemed distracted since you got back. Is something on your mind?" She laughed nervously and shook her head. "No, nothing's wrong. You're overthinking." I wanted to believe her, but the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her words were casual, but her body language told a different story. She was fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, avoiding eye contact, and giving me this tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't push her, though. After 5 years together, I'd learned that trying to force Lauren to talk only made her shut down more. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I started replaying moments in my head, trying to figure out if I'd missed something. Was there a fight I hadn't realized we'd had? Was she upset about something I said? Nothing made sense. All I knew was that the Lauren I knew, the one who used to feel like home, felt like a stranger sitting across the table from me. The days dragged on, and Lauren's behavior didn't improve. If anything, the distance between us seemed to grow. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and spent even more time on her phone. It wasn't like her to be so disconnected from me, or from life in general. Lauren was always the type who liked being present, whether that meant having deep conversations late at night or laughing uncontrollably over dumb TikToks. Now, it was like she'd retreated into a shell I couldn't reach. The phone thing started to gnaw at me. She'd never been obsessed with her phone before, but now it was practically glued to her hand. Late at night, after she thought I'd fallen asleep, I'd hear the faint buzz of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. I tried to ignore it at first, but when she'd flip her phone over or lock the screen the moment I walked into the room, my mind started spiraling. What was she hiding? One night, as we were watching a movie on the couch, her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and quickly turned it over. I couldn't help myself. Who keeps texting you so late? She froze for a second, then shrugged. Just Abby, she said, naming one of the friends from the trip. She's venting about work stuff. I wanted to believe her, but the explanation felt too casual, too easy. Abby wasn't the kind of friend who texted Lauren constantly, let alone late at night. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't push her, though. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her. But even as I tried to convince myself, that knot in my stomach tightened. A few more days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every interaction with Lauren felt strained, like we were just going through the motions. We'd talk, but the conversations felt shallow. We'd sit together, but the connection wasn't there. Even our moments of physical affection, hugs, kisses, little touches, felt distant, almost forced. It was like we were pretending to be okay when we both knew we weren't. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. After dinner, as she was clearing the plates, I said, "Lauren, we need to talk." She turned to look at me, her expression carefully neutral. "About what?" "You," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Us. You've been different ever since you got back from that trip, and I don't know what's going on, but I can feel it." She let out a soft laugh, but it didn't have any warmth. "You're overthinking again," she said, just like she had before. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not. Something's been bothering you, and instead of talking to me, you're shutting me out. I just want to know what's going on." Her eyes darted away, and she crossed her arms. "There's nothing to talk about. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I stared at her, trying to figure out if she really believed what she was saying, or if she was just trying to end the conversation. "Lauren, we've been together for 5 years," I said, my voice softening. "I know you, and I know when something's wrong. Please, just talk to me." For a moment, she looked like she was going to say something, but then she shook her head. "I'm fine, Jake." "Really?" The way she said it made my stomach drop. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the way she avoided my eyes, the way she hugged herself like she was trying to keep something in. I wanted to believe her, but every instinct in me was screaming that she wasn't telling me the truth. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past week in my head. Every weird moment, every awkward pause, every late-night text. None of it added up. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me, something she was hiding. And no matter how much I wanted to trust her, I couldn't ignore the knot of doubt growing in my chest. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I noticed her phone sitting on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, and the screen was face down, as usual. For a moment, I stood there, staring at it. My heart was racing, and my hands felt clammy. I knew it wasn't right to go through her phone. I'd never done it before, and I'd always told myself I never would. But the doubt, the questions, the gnawing feeling that I was missing something, it was all too much. I reached out, hesitated, and then pulled my hand back. "No, Jake, don't do this." But even as I walked out the door, I couldn't stop wondering what I might have found if I just looked. The tension between us continued to build, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me every time we were in the same room. Lauren wasn't just distant anymore. She was almost entirely checked out. Conversations felt like I was pulling teeth, and she always seemed distracted, her phone still a constant companion. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a pattern I couldn't ignore. One evening, after a particularly awkward dinner, I decided I needed to stop tiptoeing around the issue. I waited until we were both sitting in the living room, and I turned off the TV mid-show. Lauren looked up, startled, her phone in her lap. "What's going on?" I asked directly. "I need you to be honest with me." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about us," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "You've been acting weird since you got back from that trip. You're on your phone all the time. You barely talk to me anymore, and it feels like you're not even here." She sighed, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "Jake, you're imagining things." "No, I'm not," I shot back. "This isn't in my head, Lauren. Something's changed, and you're not telling me what it is. So just tell me. Whatever it is, I can handle it. I just need to know." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she looked away, biting her lip. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately," she said finally, her voice quieter than before. The way she said it made my heart sink. "What do you mean, thinking about us?" She took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself. "I've been thinking about how to make our relationship better. You know, like how we could grow more as individuals and as a couple." I blinked, confused. What does that even mean? Lauren fidgeted with her hands, her eyes still avoiding mine. "When I was on the trip, some of the girls were talking about their relationships and how they've tried different things to keep things exciting. It made me realize, maybe we've gotten a little too comfortable. I mean, we've been together for so long, and I just don't want us to get stuck." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Stuck? Lauren, we've been planning a future together. We've talked about buying a house, starting a family. How does that mean we're stuck?" "It's not about that," she said quickly. "It's just, I think maybe we should consider trying something new. Something that could help us both grow." The knot in my stomach tightened. "What are you trying to say, Lauren?" She hesitated, then finally looked at me. "I think we should consider opening up our relationship." I froze, her words hitting me like a slap in the face. For a moment, I wasn't even sure I'd heard her right. "You think we should what?" "Just think about it," she said, her tone too calm for what she was suggesting. "It doesn't mean I don't love you, Jake. I do. But I think this could be a way to make things better, to strengthen what we have." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "How does bringing other people into our relationship make it better?" I asked, my voice rising. "How does that strengthen anything?" She flinched but held her ground. "It's not just about that. It's about trust and freedom. About giving each other the space to grow while still being together." "Trust?" I said, practically laughing in disbelief. "You think this is about trust? Lauren, you've been hiding things from me for weeks. How am I supposed to trust you when you can't even be honest with me about what's been going on?" Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But then she straightened up and said, "I'm being honest with you now. I didn't know how to bring it up, but I thought we could at least talk about it." "Talk about what?" I shot back. "About you wanting to sleep with other people? About you deciding we're not enough without even telling me how you feel first? How is this a conversation?" "It's not like that," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't about someone else. It's about us, Jake. I thought you'd at least try to understand." I shook my head, standing up from the couch. "Understand what? That you've been distant for weeks because you've been planning to blow up our relationship? That you think the answer to whatever you're feeling is to drag other people into this? No, Lauren, I don't understand. And honestly, I don't think I want to." She stood up too, her arms crossed defensively. "You don't even want to try to talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said flatly. "If this is what you want, then we're clearly not on the same page anymore." Her face fell, and for the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. "Jake, I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought we could figure this out together." I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and hurt. "Figure out what? How to fix something you've already broken?" "No, Lauren. I'm done." She stood there, stunned, as I walked to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't feel the need to try to fix things. I didn't want to fix anything. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. Lauren's words echoed in my head, each one twisting the knife a little deeper. It's about us. It's about trust. The audacity of it all made my chest tighten. How could she frame this as something to help our relationship? How could she even say it wasn't about someone else when her behavior screamed otherwise? The next morning, I got up before Lauren and headed to work early. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to have another conversation, or worse, pretend like everything was fine. At the office, I tried to throw myself into my tasks, but my mind kept wandering. I thought about how she'd flipped her phone over every time I walked into the room, the way she'd stayed up late texting, the way she'd avoided me ever since coming back from that trip. None of it added up unless there was someone else involved. I told myself I didn't need to know. I told myself it wouldn't change anything. Her suggesting an open relationship was already enough for me to want out. But that gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The doubt, the questions, the not knowing. It was driving me insane. By the time I got home that evening, Lauren was waiting for me. She'd cleaned up the apartment, lit a candle on the coffee table, and was sitting on the couch like she'd been rehearsing what to say. I walked in and dropped my keys on the counter, pretending not to notice her right away. "Jake," she said softly, standing up, "can we talk?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "About what?" "I think we've said everything we need to." She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know I messed up," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just trying to be honest about how I was feeling." I shook my head, turning to face her. "Honest? Lauren, you've been anything but honest. You've been hiding things from me for weeks. And now you want to talk about trust?" Her face fell, but she didn't back down. "I wasn't hiding anything," she said. "I was trying to figure out how to talk to you about something that's been on my mind. That's all." "Really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because it sure feels like there's more to this than what you're saying." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting to the side. "Jake, I swear." "Let me see your phone," I interrupted. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide with panic. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice calm but firm. "If there's nothing going on, if this isn't about someone else, let me see your phone." She froze, her expression a mix of shock and defensiveness. "That's not fair," she said. "My phone is private. So is our relationship," I shot back. "But you didn't seem to care about that when you decided to suggest an open relationship. If you want me to believe you, prove it." She looked at me for a long moment, her lips pressing into a tight line. Then, with a shaky breath, she pulled her phone out of her pocket and handed it to me. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "Take it." My hands were shaking as I unlocked the phone and opened her messages. I didn't want to do this. I hated that it had come to this. But the second I started scrolling, I saw what I'd been afraid of. There was a thread with someone named Evan. The messages weren't overly explicit, but they were flirty, full of inside jokes and playful banter. One message from him read, "Can't wait to see you again, winking-faced." Lauren had replied with, "Me too. Last week was so much fun." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and disbelief. "So this is what you've been hiding?" I said, holding up the phone. Lauren's face turned pale. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," she said quickly. "I swear, it's just texting. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're making plans with him, Lauren. You're flirting with him. And you expect me to believe it's nothing?" She stepped closer, her hands outstretched like she was trying to calm me down. "Jake, I never acted on it. I was just curious, okay? It was stupid, and I shouldn't have done it, but I swear I never meant for it to go anywhere." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You were curious," I said bitterly. "Curious enough to text some guy while you were sitting next to me. Curious enough to lie to my face about it." "I didn't lie," she protested. "I just didn't know how to tell you." "That's the same thing, Lauren." I snapped. "You didn't tell me because you knew it was wrong. And now you're trying to justify it by saying it didn't mean anything? Do you even hear yourself? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked down at the floor. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. I love you, Jake. I stared at her, my chest tightening. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said quietly. You wouldn't have gone behind my back. You wouldn't have suggested opening up our relationship just to cover for whatever this is. She didn't say anything, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the sound of her shaky breathing. I think you should leave, I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. What? Jake, please. I can't do this, I said firmly. You've already broken my trust, and there's no coming back from that. Just pack your things and go. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't budge. Eventually, she nodded and walked to the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the living room. I sank onto the couch, staring at the phone still clutched in my hand. My entire world felt like it had just crumbled around me, but at least now, I finally knew the truth. After Lauren packed her things and left, the apartment felt impossibly empty. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, staring at the blank TV screen, her voice still echoing in my head. I love you, Jake. If that was love, I didn't want any part of it. The person I thought she was, the life we'd been building together, it was all gone. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left behind a shell. The first few days were the hardest. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her. Her favorite mug sat in the cabinet, her shampoo still lined the shower shelf, and the closet was half empty, her hangers still dangling where her clothes used to be. I couldn't decide if I wanted to box it all up immediately or leave it as it was, frozen in time. I settled for avoiding it altogether, spending most of my time at work or out with friends, anything to avoid coming home to the quiet. Lauren tried reaching out. The calls and texts started almost immediately after she left, and they all said the same thing, that she was sorry, that she loved me, that she wanted to fix things. I ignored every single one of them. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, and honestly, I didn't think I ever would be. She'd already said enough. The worst part wasn't her messages, though. It was the mutual friends. Some of them tried to stay neutral, saying things like, you both need time to cool off, or maybe you should hear her out. Others straight up took her side, telling me I was overreacting. She made a mistake. One friend, Matt, said over the phone, that doesn't mean you have to throw away 5 years. I nearly laughed at that. Matt, she didn't just make a mistake. She betrayed me. She lied to me. And she wanted to bring someone else into our relationship to cover it up. How is that something I'm supposed to forgive? He paused, clearly uncomfortable. I just think, maybe it's not as bad as you think. Then you don't know the whole story, I said flatly, and I ended the call. It wasn't all bad, though. A few friends had my back completely, like Eric, who showed up at my place with a six-pack the day after she left. Screw her, he said bluntly as we sat on the balcony, drinking beer and watching the sun go down. You deserve better than someone who doesn't even know what she wants. I just don't get it, I said, staring at the street below. How do you go from planning a future with someone to whatever this is? Was it all a lie? Eric shook his head. I don't think it was a lie, man. I think she's just lost. But that doesn't make it your problem. You're not her safety net. Those words stuck with me. I'd spent so much time trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently, but the truth was, this wasn't about me. Lauren made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I wasn't going to let her mistakes drag me down with her. A week later, I finally mustered the energy to pack up the rest of her things. It was harder than I thought it would be. Every item I picked up felt like a tiny betrayal. A sweater she always wore, the book she never finished reading, a framed picture of us on a hiking trip. By the time I finished, the apartment looked almost unrecognizable, stripped of everything that made it ours. But it also felt like a clean slate. I texted her from a burner number, telling her to pick up the boxes by the end of the week or they'd be donated. She replied almost immediately, thanking me and saying she'd be by on Friday. When Friday came, I made sure I wasn't home. I couldn't face her, not after everything. I left the boxes by the door and went to the gym, pushing myself harder than I ever had just to burn off the frustration. When I got back, the boxes were gone, and so was she. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, but mostly relief. It was finally over. At least, I thought it was. A few days later, Eric called me, sounding hesitant. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "What?" I asked, already bracing myself. "Lauren's been seeing someone," he said. "That guy from the texts." I wasn't surprised, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. "Good for her," I said flatly, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "That's not all," Eric continued. "She's been telling people you overreacted, that you wouldn't even try to work things out. That made my blood boil. She cheated, lied, and tried to blow up our relationship, and now she was painting me as the bad guy? Let her say whatever she wants," I said. "The people who know me will know the truth." And they did. Over the next few weeks, the people who mattered stuck by me, while the ones who believed her version of events faded into the background. I stopped hearing her name as much, and eventually, it stopped coming up at all. By then, I'd started putting my life back together. I joined a new gym, reconnected with old friends, and even picked up a new hobby, rock climbing, something I'd always wanted to try but never got around to. It felt good to focus on myself for a change, to rebuild my life on my own terms. I wasn't over everything, not completely, but I was getting there, step by step. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Months passed, and life began to feel normal again. Or at least a new version of normal. The Lauren-shaped hole in my life had started to close, and I was finally feeling like myself. The apartment, once filled with so many memories of us, now felt like mine. The quiet didn't bother me anymore. It felt peaceful, not lonely. I filled the space with new things, a couple of framed posters I'd always liked, a vintage record player I'd been eyeing for years, even a few houseplants I somehow managed to keep alive. The messages from Lauren had stopped, and so had the whispers from mutual friends. I heard through the grapevine that things with the guy she'd been seeing fizzled out after a month or two. Apparently, he wasn't looking for anything serious, and she wasn't handling the rejection well. Some part of me wanted to feel bad for her, but I couldn't. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. One day, while I was grabbing groceries, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, an old college friend named Carly. We'd had a couple of classes together back in the day, and though we weren't super close, we always got along. We ended up talking for a while in the middle of the produce aisle, catching up on life. She told me she'd just moved back to the area after a few years working abroad, and we exchanged numbers to grab coffee sometime. That coffee turned into a couple of drinks, and those drinks turned into a hike a week later. Carly was easy to talk to. There was no pressure, no pretense, just two people enjoying each other's company. She asked about my life, and though I kept the story about Lauren brief, Carly nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you dodged a bullet," she said. "It's better to find out now than 5 years down the line." Her words stuck with me. I realized she was right. As much as Lauren's betrayal had hurt, it had also set me free. It forced me to confront what I wanted in a relationship and what I absolutely wouldn't tolerate. I wouldn't have known that without going through the pain of losing her. Carly and I kept hanging out, and over time, something started to grow between us. It wasn't rushed or forced. It felt natural, like finding something you didn't know you were looking for. I didn't want to compare her to Lauren, but it was hard not to notice how different she was. Carly was upfront, honest, and steady in a way Lauren had never been. She didn't play games or make me second-guess myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I could just be me. No walking on eggshells, no constant doubt. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I knew who she meant. "Not really," I said honestly. "Not in the way I used to." Carly raised an eyebrow. "And how's that?" I thought for a moment. For a while, it was like I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what I did wrong or how I missed the signs. But now, I barely think about her at all. It's like, she's someone I used to know. She nodded, leaning back in her chair. "That's good," she said with a small smile. "Means you've moved on." "I think I have," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Lauren was a chapter of my life. one that had taught me a lot about love, trust, and the kind of person I wanted to be. But that chapter was over, and I didn't need to keep rereading it. The life I was building now was entirely my own, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about what was next. As I sat there with Carly, listening to the sound of the city at dusk, I realized something. What I'd lost with Lauren wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something new, something better. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to turn the page.